Hello and welcome to my try-on haul of the Sydney Grace x Temptalia collection. I've been following Temptalia for about 2 or 3 years now. Actually, if you also read Temptalia and you go into the comments section, you might actually see me because I am a regular commenter on Temptalia's website. And while Temptalia has done 1 or 2 collaborations in the past, distinctly, I remember when her collab shade with MAC, Jealousy Wakes, came out. I didn't read Temptalia at the time. Actually, I wasn't really even wearing makeup at that time, but a friend of mine in middle school had that shade and it just looked gorgeous every time she wore it. So when I heard Temptalia was coming out with a collaboration with Sydney Grace, I got really excited. It's kind of 2 things that I've really wanted. It's a collaboration from Temptalia since I missed out on Jealousy Wakes, and I've really wanted to try Sydney Grace for a very long time. I've heard great things about their single eyeshadows, but I personally still tend to prefer buying palettes as opposed to buying single shadows, especially in large quantities. So this was the perfect collaboration for me to jump in on. So I bought basically everything. The first thing I have here is the single that Temptalia created called Dear Reader, as well as the 3 palettes. Everything came really beautifully wrapped in this box, and I think I'll just go from whatever palette's on top to whatever palette's on bottom. So just because it was on top, let's pop into the single shadow first. Looks like it crumbled just a little bit in the packaging, but not in a way that's super noticeable on the pan. There's just a little bit of residue on the packaging. Ta-da! Ooh, that's pretty. So let's give this a swatch. It feels a little harder in the pan than I was expecting. Yesterday, I just filmed. Ooh, that's so pretty. Anyways, yesterday I was filming my try-on haul of the Romand Glitter and Garden palette. It was a collective haul, so it included like a ton of other stuff too. The main thing was the Glitter and Garden eyeshadow palette, and I think we have this expectation of shimmers being soft and buttery, or else they're not gonna work as well if they're harder pressed into the pan, but at least swatched, this looks great. Alrighty, I've popped the Sydney Grace single shadow into my Divina palette, and now let's move on to the first palette. So the first one on top says RR Light. I'm assuming that's the Radiant Reflection palette. Ooh, my mom is gonna love these giant sheets of bubble wrap the palettes come in. She loves keeping bubble wrap for packing things. But yes, this is Radiant Reflection, and here it is. Now the question is, should I keep the outer slip when the outside of the packaging looks exactly the same? Decisions. But anyways, here's the inside of the palette. We're seeing it for the first time together. Ooh! So I've peeled off the plastic thingy on the mirror and I've taken away the outer plastic protector. So yes, here is the full palette. Oh, you can see my dresser. I should have worn a short sleeve today because I'm gonna be doing a lot of swatching. I really should have thought of that. Oh well, just pulling off my shirt will hopefully be enough. So I'll let you take one more look at the palette. I know I want to look at it a little bit more, but let's get into swatching. So the first shade on the top row is called Unstoppable Love. It's one of the matte shades that changes depending on if you got the darker or the lighter version. Ooh, even though this is the lighter version, that's still a fairly deep color. I think if you were like deep dark, that might start look kind of weird on you, but for almost everybody else, I think that's a pretty dark matte. Alright, next is Uprose. Might have trouble pronouncing some of these names. Temptalia has a very, I think, developed vocabulary, unlike me. So I think that's why I've noticed in some of the other videos talking about, I haven't watched any reviews, but I've definitely seen a lot of new makeup release videos talking about these palettes. A lot of people are having trouble pronouncing some of the names, and honestly, I don't blame them. That's probably gonna be me too. So the third shade is called Temptalia. And this is definitely a Temptalia shade. Woohoo! Purple shade is called Forget Her Not. Everything about the matte is going on really smooth, which is something I know Sydney Grace is known for. It's very nice to see it in person. So next is called Our Starry Night. So Our Starry Night is very interesting because it looks really chunky in the pan. I know it's not a glitter. Temptalia would not do that to us. So it'll be interesting to see what this looks like. Ooh, oh, that's so cool. Yeah, it's like a metallic, but once you kind of shear it out, it's, oh wow. It's got like the intensity of a duochrome without being a duochrome, if that makes any sense. Alrighty, gonna give this hand a break. I'm gonna start swatching with the other hand. So the next shade is Glossover. Ooh. Let me compare that with our Starry Night. Our Starry Night is definitely dark. The camera's making them look the same, but our Starry Night is definitely darker, and Glossover is definitely lighter. And you can see that in the pan too. I'm not sure, do they look the same on camera? No, they look different on camera, but for some reason when I swatch them on camera, they look similar. So the first shade on the second row is called Sumptuous Serendipity. Ta-da! Yeah, I think part of what makes Temptalia such a good reviewer is her very developed sense of vocabulary and language. And then the next shade is, this is another one I'm gonna debate. Is that Persephone? No, Persephone is spelled differently, so this is Perse. Nah, I'm not gonna try. I know I'm gonna be wrong, one way or another. Ooh. Oh, that's gorgeous. Next is Dearest Constant. I was weirdly excited for this matte because it does lean on the cool tone side, and if you watch my eyeshadow collection video, you'll know I have a love for kind of greigey cool tone mattes, just because they look a little more natural on me compared to warm tone mattes. Warm tone mattes really stand out on my eyes, and sometimes I don't always want that. Next is Exquisite Opulence. Ooh, gold! Gold. You know I love gold. Woohoo! Honestly, it's interesting we opened with Radiant Reflection first. If I only could pick one palette, it probably would be this one. So in an unintentional way, we're almost starting with the best first, at least as far as my expectations go. Who knows, I might end up liking another one of the palettes better. Yeah, gold, gold. Like I said, if you watch my eyeshadow palette collection, you know me in gold. Or even my eyeshadow singles collection, because we have all the gold color and golden brown, like Colourpop Super Shock shadows. Alrighty, next shade is called Jealousy's Descent. I know Temptalia talked about this kind of being the spiritual successor to Jealousy Wakes. Ooh, oh, it actually really does look like Jealousy Wakes. So the final shade is called Sublime Reverie. Ooh, it's like a turquoise matte. I didn't realize there was a third matte shade in here. I feel like if you like mattes, then this palette might not be for you, but I share Temptalia's love of shimmers. I know she recently just talked about in an article how she prefers shimmers over mattes, and I am definitely the same. Alright, that was Radiant Reflection. Let's get on to the second palette. So this next palette is the Quintessence Palette. I know this is the palette that everyone had problems pronouncing because it's pretty close to quintessential, so I think minds were like skipping to there, but it's the Quintessence Palette, and this is also in the light variation. Aww. I love how all these palettes, they connect up to create a single image, and they've all got this kind of Starry Night theme. I think that ties in together well with the color stories as well. Ooh. This palette came with just a little bit of fallout around the packaging. I just kind of cleaned it up a little bit. But yeah, let's start swatching. I'm really excited. So the first shade is this black called Umbra. Wow, and that swatched really well for a black. Next is called Orion Nebula. My childhood of reading mid-century sci-fi is very much coming in handy today. Third shade, ooh, this purple. This looks really nice. It's called Aurora. Ooh. The next shade, also gorgeous, this green, it's called Borealis. Ooh, how similar is that to Jealousy's Descent? On camera, they do look different, but in person, the difference is even more stark. Jealousy's Descent is darker and more of a turquoise, where Borealis is lighter. It's more of kind of like a bright, I don't know if I'll call it forest green, but it's kind of like no, it's more like an alien green. Next is called Galactic Muse. Ooh, look at my finger. Oh, wow. Oh, wow, that went on great. Okay, so the camera is making Jealousy's Descent and Galactic Muse look really similar. In person, they do have similar kind of turquoise tones. I would say Galactic Muse is actually more of a true turquoise, whereas Jealousy's Descent leans more green. Alrighty, the last shade in this first row is called Interstellar. These dark mattes are swatching really impressively. They're actually, honestly, kind of swatching better than some of the lighter mattes from the Radiant Reflection palette. Okay, first shade in the second row is Celestial Bloom. Ooh. That actually, I like the color, but out of all the shimmers so far, that's actually swatched the weakest. But by weakest, we're comparing it to things like this. So it's still swatched well, but, and of course swatches only mean so much, especially when you're putting things on your eyes and not your arms. But yeah, I did have to, I feel like I have to mention that. Did swatch the weakest so far out of all of them. Next one is called the Milky Way. Ooh, that would be a great topper. I like that. Alrighty, you know how I said I like greigey mattes? Here's some more greigey mattes. That's why I got the light version. I could, with my skin tone, I could probably get away with both the lighter and the darker version. But especially for this palette, the lighter shades, or the lighter version definitely called out to me a lot more. First one is called Reaching Zenith. Yeah, greigey matte. That would look really great on me. Speaking of the dark variation, I did get the dark variation for this last palette on the horizon. Not because... Alrighty, this one is called Parallax. Not because the light version wouldn't work for me. I could, like I said, I probably could get away with both. But the lighter version, one of the shades was kind of like a pinky mauve, and with pinky mauves, I kind of have to be careful because sometimes they make me look like I have pink eye. So I decided just to not risk it and just get the darker version because, like I said, I could probably get away with both. Second to last shade, Sirius Starlight. Ooh. It looks more of like a darker gray in the pan, but swatch, that's almost like white. It's really cool. Next, it looks a little bit either like a swirled shade or a duochrome. It's called My Constellation. It's this last shade. Ooh, yeah, because it's like, it's got kind of a muted purple-brown base, but it's got like flecks in it, some kind of like reddish flecks, I want to say. Yeah, it's hard to, this shade is actually really hard to describe, which is what makes it so interesting. Alrighty, that was the Quintessence palette. Now let's move on to the final palette. Alrighty, so like I said, we're at the last palette, and this is the On the Horizon Deep variant. But I do have to point out this outer packaging in particular, because look, it's Melon! For those of you who don't know, Melon was Christine from Temptalia's dog who passed away, I want to say a few months before the release of this palette. And so she was included in the outer packaging. I mean, I've never owned a dog. I've always wanted to own a pet, but I've never been allowed to. But even then, I can understand like the bond that people can have with their animals. Obviously, as someone who's an avid watcher of Claire Lovecat and her 10 cats. But here it is, On the Horizon. Ooh. Alrighty, so the first shade is called Heart Dog. Oh, I'm gonna get emotional in a palette try-on. Wow. Okay, so this palette I think is the most muted of all the three. Using the term muted lightly because it's kind of like, oh, this was the weakest shade swatched, but you have like this to compare it to. This is the most muted shade, but considering how vibrant the other two are, if you were to compare this against most regular palettes, this would be considered the vibrant one, but just because the other two I'm comparing it against are so much more vibrant, even on their own, by comparison, this is the most muted one. But if you just compare this to most regular palettes, you'd be like, oh, yo, no, this is the colorful one. So the second shade is called Earthbound. Oh, there's a video game series called Earthbound. A friend of mine in middle school loved playing. Ooh, I love all the greens. They're all in different palettes, but I feel like the greens and the blues and the purples are all kind of complementary to each other, even though they're in separate palettes. Next is a green matte called Desert Spoon. Ooh, that's a nice green. It looks more khaki on my arms, whereas in the pan, it swatches a little more neutral. Or in the pan, it looks a little more neutral. Alrighty, next shade I'm gonna have trouble pronouncing. It's either Magellan's Light or Magdalene's Light. Ooh. Did not do a great service by swatching it with my, the underside of my pinky. But it still looks great. Alright, next shade is called Phoenix Awakens. Ooh. Alrighty, last shade in the first row is called October Odyssey. Wow. Like I said, all these dark mattes are swatching really great. So the first shade in the second row, also darker matte, it's called Midnight Courage. Ooh. Now this swatch is more like how I would expect a darker matte to swatch. It doesn't mean it's not going to perform on the eyes. So the next shade is called Flying High. It's a shimmer with a bit more of a harder texture, kind of how Dear Reader was. Ooh. This is a rare occasion for my camera because they actually look more similar in person compared to what they look like on camera. On the camera, this shade, Flying High, looks lighter, but in person, they almost look like they have the same depth of color. It's just the finish, and then the matte, Midnight Courage, is slightly more cool-toned. It's very interesting. So the next shade is Lunar Illumination. I'm gonna give a better swatch for my pinky this time. Ooh. This is one of those shades where it's got lavender tones, but because of my camera, it looks kind of white on camera. Next shade is a matte called Infinite Echoes. Ta-da! Ooh. Looks almost black on camera, but in person it's more of a coffee brown, very dark coffee brown. Okay, so the second to last shade is called Sakura Glow. Ooh, alright, and the final shade is called Calming Presence. Like swatching right next to my elbow. Ooh, oh wow. This isn't a duochrome, but in person it looks like a deep violet, and then on camera it's like blue. Alrighty, so I somehow got through swatching all three palettes. So I've debated back and forth about whether I want to do one eyeshadow look with all three palettes, only one look with one palette, or 3 looks with 3 palettes. And even though realistically I am a little bit on a time crunch currently when it comes to filming and editing videos, I am almost working full time now, so I don't have as much time as I used to dedicate to YouTube. But I also wanted to get the most use out of these palettes in this video as possible, so I am going to do 2 different looks, one for each eye, with each palette, but I am not going to be talking during any of it. Instead, I'll just have my usual, probably Animal Crossing music playing in the background as I apply these different eye looks. I have a feeling no one's gonna really want a tutorial from me anyway, because I don't tend to be super creative with my eye looks. I don't have a lot of eye space to work with in general, so I can't get super crazy with color combos. But I did really want to show off all 3 eyeshadow palettes in the best way as possible. That's not just swatching them on my arm. I really did want to do something with them on my eyes. So yeah, let's get going. Alrighty, so the first palette is Radiant Reflection, and I think for this eye, I'm gonna go in with more neutral look using kind of this side of the palette, and then for this eye, I'm going to be going in with a more colorful, probably more cool-toned look with the brights on this side. So let's get going. Alrighty, so here is the 2 looks from the first palette, Radiant Reflection. Yep, checking to make sure I got that right. So for this look, it's actually more complicated than this look, despite being the more neutral of the 2. For this look, I went in first with Unstoppable Love, and then topped it with a bit of the shimmer Temptalia, and then for the transition, kind of just very subtly up here, I just went in with some Dearest Constant. And then for this too, this is just 2 eyeshadows. I just went in first with Jealousy's Descent, and then for the intersection, just topped it off a little bit with Glossover. I could honestly probably go a little bit more further in to my inner corner. It honestly doesn't matter on this eye as much though, because I have the crease, the double lid on this eye, whereas on this eye I don't. It honestly makes doing 2 different eye looks on each eye a lot easier when you have 2 different eye shapes. So anyways, I am going to take this off as much as I kind of don't want to, and we'll get on to the 2 looks for the next palette. So next we have the Quintessence palette, and I'm honestly not really sure if I want to go into the neutrals at all. I kind of want to do one eye with the purples and then one eye with the greens. Here I go again with my typical colors. That's honestly why I bought all 3 palettes, is like these are all 3 colors I love. So here we go. So here is the 2 looks for the second palette. Like I said, I am not super creative when it comes to eye look, especially given my limited eye space. I basically almost did the same technique for both of these eyes. For this eye, I went in first with Aurora, and then I went in on the outer lid with Celestial Bloom, and then topped it with some of the Milky Way. And then for this eye, I went in first with the Borealis, did the outer lid with Galactic Muse, and then went in the inner corner with Sirius Starlight. Now, the 2 purple shades here have almost blended to the point where they almost kind of look like the same shade on my eyes. They definitely looked different when I first put them on, but as I blended them, they started really just blending into one another. But this shade, I think it's or the 2 shades, I think it's, ooh, some fallout, but I think it's a lot easier to tell which shade ends where and the other shade begins. And then the 2 inner corners, let me show you them in the pans. So this is the one I have on my left eye, and this is the one I have on my right eye. In the pans, they look pretty different, but as inner corners, they look really similar. But I can tell that like one is more cool toned, which honestly suits this eye better, and then this one has a kind of a reddish warm tone to it, which fits this eye better. I think it's also the camera that's making them look the same as well. So yeah, I really love these eye looks. I really like all these eye looks I've made. Like, even though, like I said, not super creative, unfortunately, but that's more user error on my part. So I'm gonna, one more time, take this off, and we can do 2 eye looks with the last palette. I do have to note, these eyeshadows, for how pigmented they are, actually come off really well. There is a slight green tint on this eye from where I put the greens on. There's also a very slight green tint. Oh, I didn't completely take this one off. But there is also a very slight green tint on my arms as well from the dark greens and blues, kind of similar to the Kaleidos eyeshadows. It's definitely something to note, but it's not something I'm going to be putting against these eyeshadows for very pigmented, particularly mattes. It's a very common thing to see some staining, but we're getting on to the last palette on the horizon. Ooh. So in the spirit of this being the more neutral palette, I actually don't think I'm going to be touching the greens or that purple guy. I think I'm going to be doing kind of a more warm toned look on this eye and then a more cool tone look on this eye. So let's get started. Okay, so here are the two looks for On the Horizon. Now, I did lie. I did go into the green a little bit for this side, but for this side, I kept it pretty neutral. Just started with some Phoenix Awakens, and then for the inner part of the lid, as well as the inner corner, I went in with Magdalene's Light. That's one of the ones I struggle with. But then for this one, I started with the transition color, October Odyssey, and then went in with a little bit of Earthbound, and then some Heart Dog in the inner part of the lid and the inner corner, and then I blended it all out. I feel like this side is like a typical kind of Temptalia eye look. I always think of like, yeah, her doing kind of the transition matte, but then blending in these really intense shimmers all over the lid, where this is sort of more kind of my typical style of just keeping everything kind of close to the eye, not wanting to smoke things out for fear of looking like I'm attempting drag. So yes, that was it. That was technically 6 looks with 3 palettes, because I did a different look for each eye. I did not dig into the Dear Reader single on my eyes today, but rest assured, you'll be seeing both the single and the 3 palettes on my channel a lot in the coming future. I am so excited to finally have these palettes and really dig in with them. And I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know, are you going to be picking up the Sydney Grace Temptalia collection? Did you already pick it up? I'm pretty sure most of the collection by now is sold out, but I would not put it past Sydney Grace to be doing some kind of restock. Actually, I would be really surprised if they didn't do a restock. So do let me know what you thought, and until then, I will see you next time.